This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome Rabbi. We continue in Devorah. This is the penultimate review, chapter 9. And then Be'ezus Hashem, tomorrow we'll finish, and perhaps Wednesday we'll do some kind of quick review of the whole Sefer. Probably Thursday will be off, and then we'll begin again Monday, in all likelihood, the new limud. Okay, so chapter 9 is the Midah of Malchus. The Midah of Malchus is Shechina. Shechina, how does one accord themselves in a manner which is in accordance, concurrent with the concept of Malchus and Shechina. So the Devorah says the first thing one has to do is to be careful not to be arrogant in their heart about anything, make themselves always like a pauper, stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu like a poor man, beseeching and requesting, and train oneself in this midah, even if one is wealthy and has resources, but recognize that nothing will remain with you, and ultimately a person will be forsaken and forlorn, and how much we're utterly dependent on the Rachamei Shamayim, and all we have basically is the food we eat, and especially during Tefillah. It is what the Devorah calls a skula nefla during Tefillah, to be completely cognizant and aware, to be completely cognizant and aware that one is utterly dependent on the Rachamei Shamayim. The opposite of this midah is v'ram levavecha v'shachachta Hashem. For shikha, when one is arrogant, it causes shikha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and removal of the Shechina. And this is the midah of David HaMelech, who said, Ki yachid va'ani ani. Now, all the people of his household, even if a person feels that he's bolstered, he's supported by his family, but the truth is that ultimately nobody could really help you, even your wife and children, during the time that the Rebbe Shalom judges you, or at the time that the neshama is leaving this world. Nobody could accompany you. The furthest they get is up to the kever. But at the time of the din, once you get to the kever, there's nothing anybody could do to help you. So this is the midah of Malchus, which is less migarmei klum, where a person does not have anything on its own, and that is the ikar. That is the main component, or the main characteristic of Malchus. The defining characteristic of Malchus is shaloi yisgoya, less migarmei klum, especially during tefillah. Next, in order to acquire this, and a very chashuv aspect of acquiring Malchus is exiling yourself l'shem shamayim, and by doing so, like Rav Nassan, you pointed out, Rashi says in Parshas Lech Lecha, Vayal Hashem me'al Avraham, Malamed she'ha'avos, become merkava to the Shechina. When one goes into Galus, they become the merkava to the Shechina, and one should say, God, the Shechina is in Galus. The reason why this has to do with Malchus is because the Shechina is in Galus. And the Shechina, when the Shechina is Galus, the Shechina goes into Galus without any of its kelim. It does not, all the kelim of the Beis HaMikdash, so to speak, are lost, are plundered. So one should try to minimize, when they go into Galus, the appurtenances they take with themselves, and this will humble a person, and by doing so, the Shechina will be with them. And one should make themselves as if they're banished, and like Reb Shimon and his friends would banish themselves and be oisek b'Torah, and to go from one place to the other without transportation, and by doing so, one becomes a merkava to the Shechina. Now, another midah that is relevant to Malchus, which is very chashuv, and the gateway of all avodas Hashem, and that is to fear HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but one has to be careful not to fear any external, secondary aspects of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, one should not fear the punishment, namely Yisurim, or Misa, or Gehenna. One should not fear illness, death. These are agents of Hashem. By fearing them, you're empowering them. Fear Him. Fear God. The main fear is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and one should contemplate the following three things, which are really four. Number one, God is greater than everything. He's greater than a lion, a bear, or any frightening thing. Now, if somebody would be in the presence of a terrorist or an avalanche, how frightful they would be. Why should one not be even more frightful of the great king? Just because God is tolerant, does that should that in any way mitigate the fear that we have from Him? Number two, when one imagines, when one thinks about how Hashem is always looking, overseeing, being mashkiach, a Eved is always afraid when he realizes he's in the presence of his master, so we should always recognize God's mind is always on us, seeing and knowing everything we do, think, and are inclined to do. Number three, realize God is the source and the root of all souls, and all souls are rooted in the Sephiros, and when one sins, they're actually impugning and ruining the palace of Hashem, and therefore one should be afraid of ruining God's palace. And finally, number four, one should recognize that not only is one ruining Hashem's palace, but one is actually pushing away the Raglei Ashchina, the Shechina. One is actually pushing away HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How one should be afraid, Chas v'Shalom, to in any way be causing the Rebbeinu Shalom to leave a certain area. Now, another thing one should be careful about to ensure that the Shekhinah should always be clinging to a person, never leave a person, and that is a person, before they marry, he obviously has no Shekhinah with him. The Ikar HaShekhinah is Zachar and Nekeva. The Ikar HaShekhinah for a Zachar is Mitzad the Nekeva. In a way where a person is standing between two Nekevas. The Nekeva above, namely the Nekeva above is the Shekhinah, Nekeva below is one's wife. And when one is married, therefore, one is in the context and in the proper framework to be Zoichet Hashras HaShechina. The Nekeva Tachtoina is one's wife, from which she takes from you She'er Ksus and Oina, food, clothing, and marital responsibility. And the Shechina blesses the man with those gifts so that he can then bestow it upon his wife. Just like Tiferes is smack in between the Nekeva above, which is Bina, and the Nekeva below, which is Malchus. So when a man is married, he's emulating the Sephiros above. So when one is married, he allows the Shechina to give to him so he could give to his wife, and that allows a flow between the Sephiros above, namely from Bina to Tiferes to Malchus. Now, the Shechina will only come to a person if one is in the form of the Sephiros upstairs. Now, a person may separate from his wife for one of three reasons. Number one, she's a nida. Number two, during the week, one is oisek in Torah, as the Noid Behuda, as we mentioned, the story of the Noid Behuda spent the entire week in the Beis HaMedrash. And number three, if somebody's traveling. Now, during these times, the Shechina tries to do chesed to a person and is mizdabek to a person so that a person should not be forsaken since they're not together with their wife, and unless somebody's zachar nekeva, they're not in the framework to be mekabel the Shechina. Now, since the Shechina is mizdabek with you, you want to make sure the Shechina doesn't leave you. How do you do that? When you go out on the road, make sure you say Tfilas Haderech. That will ensure the Shechina stays with you. Learn Torah. That will make sure the Shechina stays with you. And when one's wife is a nida, the Shechina will stay with you if you're careful from those particular halachas. But then when the wife becomes mutter, or the Leil Tefillah, or Leil Shabbos, or when you come back from a trip, all of these times are a time of oina, then the Shechina opens up above to mekabel the neshamas from above, then one should visit his wife at that time, and this way the Shechina will always be with you. Now, if you want to be mizdaveg, unite with the Shechina, and the Shechina never depart you, you need to adorn yourself with the various adornments and beautiful clothing. What are the adornments and beautiful clothing? They are the tikkun hamidos, and after one is mesakein themselves with the proper midos, one should be mechavein to mekabel the Shechina when one is oisek in Torah and accepts upon oneself the yoke of mitzvahs. And by doing so, the Shechina will cling to you and not depart from you, provided that you learn and mekabel the mitzvahs b'tahara and b'kedusha. And once you're tahara and kadosh, you should be mechavein that just like you give your wife she'er ksus and oina, you want to be fulfill these mitzvahs to effectuate in the spheros. She'er, food, you through your masim toivim, your mashpia shefa from the side of chesed. Ksus. What does it mean to clothe? When you clothe your wife, you have in mind you want to clothe the Shechina from Gevurah, that Gevurah should not be shoyleit. And what that means is you want to be careful the way you provide, so to speak, the Shechina with ksus is not to allow any Yetzer Hara to enter in the performance of your mitzvahs. For example, when one would perform a mitzvah for hana and for anticipation of kavod, and by doing so, the Yetzer Hara is very frequent and common, and is found when a person performs a mitzvah for ulterior motives. That's an ulterior motive in the performance of a mitzvah is like erva. So therefore you need to cover the erva and hide it so that it is not shoyle in the performance of a mitzvah. Instead, one should be careful to do their mitzvahs l'shem shamayim. Likewise, wearing tefillin, wearing tzitzis are also ksus. One is protecting the Shechina from midas hagvura. And finally, number third, which is marital obligation, you accomplish that through oina. What is oina? You're going to unite the Shechina with Tiferes. When you do mitzvahs at specific times, namely when you say Kriya Shema Bizmanoi, or when you're Koivea Itim LaTorah, these are oina, so one should have in mind, when one does mitzvahs at specific times, one is then fulfilling the mitzvah of oina to the Shechina, and is uniting Tiferes with the Shechina, the Ish with the Isha, and one is causing a flow of Shefa in the spheres. Okay, so that completes chapter 9. Be'ezus Hashem, we'll finish chapter 10 tomorrow. Wednesday, we'll have a executive review of the whole Sefer very quickly. We'll use Rav Nassim's notes. And then Thursday, we will have a break. And Be'ezus Hashem, Monday, we're going to try a new limud, in all probability, the Igaras Hagra, which is very short, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do from there on. Okay? Rabbi say.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.